sia peggio che esca dalla costanza, però non era bene. Io non ho capito come è uscito da no, quando dicevo di fare insieme con modi diversi, però non va bene la rivista. Allora, si toglie notiziario, si è tolto la cosa del e allora no, va bene, comunque voglio dire
avete deciso quando parlerà come si lavora
c'è tante cose a pensare.
Ok.
No, perché adesso vedo sul Canada, noi abbiamo facciamo un altro allora, no, ma sì, l'ho seguito. No, l'ha fatta, allora io sono arrabbiatissimo contro la rivista perché con queste fatte malasta, io mi sono allora, è arrivata alle 10, a mezzogiorno vedo il messaggio, era già stato attribuito. Ho detto, ma è possibile, a chi l'avete dato? Non si sa. Ho detto a Fabio Maury che aveva il libro, ho detto io perché lui lavora su combinazione, ma non su carta. E il libro l'ha avuto solo me, l'era data, e poi me lo doveva dare a me, ho detto c'è il libro. Allora, chi lo deve fare questa recensione? Allora, noi capito con questa lista che passa se lo prendo. Ma come? Io lo volevo fare, ci tenevo molto perché l'ho seguito, l'ho fatto fare la sua prima intervento, no, niente da fare. È stata allora ho detto a Fabio, sì, no, ho detto sì. La ripartizione. Perché lo devono dare a qualcuno che l'ha seguito, perché sono troppo favorevoli, ma almeno qualcuno sa, e anche lei sarebbe contenta. Poi non cambia
questioni tipo costituisce la massa, rispondere.
Anzi, che vuol ah, perché lui ha scritto il libro all'epoca.
È stato costruito
mescolata.
Ci sono da quella parte, ma qui è l'unica.
Come dice?
Può partire la registrazione se...
Ora aspetto un
momento.
momento. Insisto a dire che... Mi sentite?
No. Sono io che gli ho chiesto di nuovo. Forse è lui che lo sa.
Può partire?
Si lascia intanto. Quando è il momento lo
Ma
prende...
io voglio cominciare a parlare.
Ah, allora sì.
Che si deve fare?
Niente, può parlare.
Mi sentite? Sì. Momento di attenzione. Buongiorno. Il Centro Siena-Toronto è lieto di ospitare gli ospiti canadesi e gli ospiti italiani in questo argomento che già è stato trattato, cioè il nord del Canada, alcuni anni fa. Il professor Bargagli era uno dei relatori, e che rappresenta uno dei punti di sviluppo del Canada, questa nazione apparentemente come territorio sterminata. Ci sono 7 ore di differenza da un estremo all'altro, ore in senso del zona time zone. Io ringrazio, generalmente si ringrazia alla fine, ma io comincio all'inizio ringraziando prima di tutto gli ospiti che sono intervenuti, le autorità che sono intervenute, il professor Mellini che sostituisce il rettore e è attualmente all'estero, ringrazio il colonnello comandante la brigata della Folgore e passo immediatamente la parola al professor Mellini che ci porterà l'indirizzo di saluto del rettore.
Good morning to everybody, buongiorno a tutti. Io sono preside della facoltà di scienze e rappresento oggi il rettore che appunto non può essere presente e se ne scusa. Mi permetto di mettere in evidenza, a nome anche del rettore, l'importanza degli argomenti che vengono trattati oggi, specie all'interno di problematiche più generali di evoluzioni, variazioni climatiche, sfruttamento delle risorse, protezione dell'ambiente, mitigazione dei danni e tutta una serie di prospettive geopolitiche che il Nord ci presenta in questo momento. Just to add some personal flavor, I am particularly pleased to be here today because I have some personal relation with Canada. For instance, I've studied as a professional a mineral named euconite, and so this mineral whose name is dedicated to Yukon. I've been for a while associated editor of the Canadian Mineralogist, and I've read when young quite a lot of Jack London. E quindi a questo punto io vi auguro buon lavoro e mi auguro che all of you may enjoy the small old town and its rooms like this one. Good work.
Thank you, Professor Mellini. And after we have thanked the authority, present authority that are here in person, I have to speak about the prefetto and the sindaco who cannot be here because of the strike that is actually in the street. And apart those, the authority who is not present is the ambassador of Canada, who has sent a letter that now Professor Ferri would read for you.
It is a letter he sent because he would have liked to be here, and it is to cari amici, dear friend and chers amis. And although I could unfortunately not be in Siena with you today, I would like to virtually welcome to Italy and to wonderful Siena all of the Canadians who have been invited to the conference, and to thank all the Italians, experts and students for their participation in this interesting meeting. Nous sommes reconnaissants to Professor Forconi and Laura Ferri, and also wish to thank all of the Siena-Toronto Center's collaborators for the realizations of today's conference. Come voi tutti sapete, correctly in 3 languages, come voi tutti sapete, il nord e l'Artico sono temi prioritari per il governo del Canada, e siamo lieti di vedere che il Centro Siena-Toronto si è impegnato nella loro promozione e divulgazione in Italia. The North is a part of Canada's identity, culture and socio-economic development, and will continue to be so in the years to come. As the famous Canadian pianist Glenn Gould once said, something really does happen to most people who go into the North. They become at least aware of the creative opportunity which the physical fact of the country represents, and quite often, I think, come to measure their own work and life against that rather staggering creative possibility. They become, in effect, philosophers. Auguro quindi a tutti di avere oggi un incontro proficuo e scambi fruttuosi per le nostre reciproche nazioni. Un bon souhaitant, une bonne conférence. I wish you a fruitful conference. James A. Fox, ambasciatore del Canada in Italia. But I think we want the address now of a person who's representing an institution which helped us to make this event possible. And the Dean of Arts of the University of Ottawa, who I think will speak on behalf of the Institute of Canadian Studies. His name is Anthony René.
Thank you very much, Laura, and it's a great pleasure for me to be with you here this morning, and indeed for all day. Donc c'est un grand plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue ici ce matin de la part de l'Université d'Ottawa, qui est une université bilingue. So we are a university that works in both languages. Unfortunately, they are French and English and not Italian, but we do in fact have an Italian program in our Department of Modern Languages and Literatures that is also a very important program to us. So I want to thank Laura for inviting me and as representative of the Faculty of Arts, in which we have the Institute of Canadian Studies. And the Institute has a long-standing interest in welcoming foreign scholars who are interested in Canada in general, and who are able or interested in working in either of the 2 official languages of Canada. So it's a pleasure for me to be here today, both in charge of that, but also as a researcher who works in the North myself, and to whom there are a couple of colleagues, because I have been to the Italian base and spent time at the Italian base in Antarctica, as well as working in the North, so I have a number of other links to Italy. One of the things that's a great pleasure about this meeting is that we're talking about the North, and for those of us who work there, it is a fundamental part of our identity. if anybody is to create ever an institute for the North, and there is a researcher that works in the North, they have to be part of that institute. They simply could not avoid it. And so it's a very important part for those of us who work there. It becomes part of us. And I particularly like the fact that the quote that's up here behind me earlier on by John Moss is in fact by one of the former professors at the University of Ottawa. For him, it became part of his identity, just as I'm sure it's become part of Charlotte's and Aretha's, to be working in the North. But we only go there occasionally. For those who live in the North, whether they be First Nation peoples or Inuit or people like us who have moved there, it represents a fundamental part of who they are. And things are changing. So I think today we will have a very interesting meeting. And again, I would like to I'm very happy that we've been able to collaborate with the Centre for the University of Toronto in Siena on this symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have some practical announcement. First of all, I would like to explain the title. If anybody has noticed the title, that is that continuing to talk. Well, it's just to say that we have had a few other previous meetings about the northern and polar regions as seen by scientists or by writers like Joe Fiorito with his song Beneath the Ice, Jim McNeil who saw the Antarctica with her Ice Lover, I think it was her novel, or Noah Richler, who came here to talk about This Is My Country, his book This Is My Country, what's yours. So we have had a few events with Glenwood, of course, always as a background music interpreting the solitude of the white wilderness. On each occasion I have used to epitomize, in an attempt to epitomize the meaning of the talks which we have had here, I have used as a refrain John Moss's words, which have disappeared at the right moment, and in which he says, we are a northern, thank you, we are a northern country, but he has, Anthony has already said what John Moss was saying, and basically those who go there see that the North has seasons, meaning has different ways to be lived in, and those who have been there know that, but for all of us we must continue to interpret this and see what we can find there. Today, thank you to all those who are here to tell us what they have found there from their different perspectives of history, geography, or geology, political science, and on the wings of the imagination, as in the case of our writer and scholar Rita Van Erck. Thanks then to choreographer Charlotte Gray to celebrate her book. In fact, we conceived the event, and to the Canadian writer Rita Van Erck, and to the people who have, and Anthony, whom you have already seen, and to those who have made a journey to Siena, even though from much closer cities, like Fabrizio Ghilardi, Professor Fabrizio Ghilardi, and Professor Maury, whom you will hear after the Canadians, I believe. And a great thank you to the professors of the University of Siena, Capineri and Bargagli. I'm sorry, it's the sleeping people which erased the name. And Bargagli, who is a kind of link throughout our series, because he has helped us also in past events with his knowledge of the other polar region, that is Antarctica. I think I am missing a few people, but I don't want to forget the schools who are here, the classes from the Liceo Linguistico and from the Liceo Linguistico Montagnese, Liceo Scientifico Galilei, and their teachers, Katia Zottola, Robert, Fabrizio, and Laura Paisi. Sorry for the misprone arrangement of the names. So I think now we begin with Charlotte Gray, famous biographer. You will read her profile in the handouts, which I hope have been handed out to all of you. Thank you very much. What I need. Charlotte, so it's.
Are we going to have a reading, Laura? I wasn't sure if Moira is going to read.
I think yes. Another thing which I forgot, there is a kind of reshuffle of the schedule. And so this morning we'll have Charlotte Gray and Arita, followed by Arita Van Erck, as we are tuned to the English. Then Cristina Capineri. Professor Roberto Bargagli and René Maury, after we have heard Fabrizio Ghilardi, will speak in the afternoon with Anthony Collins. And we begin Charlotte Gray's presentation with, as a kind of warm-up, with the Italian translation that Moira Mini is reading her own translation of part of the first chapter of the book, Gold Diggers.
Thank you. I segreti dell'Artico, giugno 1896. Il vasto fiume trascinava la piccola imbarcazione lungo la corrente melmosa. Tutto ciò che i due uomini dovevano fare era tenersi alla larga dai pericoli, aggirando banchi di ghiaia, alberi sradicati, lastre di ghiaccio. Un grosso ramo che sporgesse dalla sponda avrebbe potuto facilmente colpire e sommergere il loro natante artigianale. Eppure Bill Haskell non poteva trattenersi dal guardare in alto di tanto in tanto. Miglia dopo miglia della più selvaggia bellezza si srotolava davanti agli occhi come in una panoramica continua, avrebbe ricordato in seguito. Era l'inizio di giugno ormai e le giornate erano lunghe. La luce indugiava nel cielo del nord fino a dopo la mezzanotte. Dirupi a precipizio rilucevano di giallo al sole di mezzogiorno o di viola intenso nell'oscurità della sera. La neve incappucciava ancora le montagne distanti, ma Bill e il suo socio, Joe Mick, non avevano visto segni di presenza umana per giorni ed erano intimiditi dalla vastità del paesaggio. La bellezza era soffusa di minaccia. Il sibilo dei sedimenti del fiume che si sfregavano contro il fianco dell'imbarcazione e il gracchiare stridente dei corvi enfatizzavano il silenzio misterioso anziché romperlo. Ogni tanto un grande alce maschio appariva al margine del lago e li fissava. Quando approdavano con il natante, trovavano sulla sponda escrementi di orso recenti e ossa sbiancate di animali delineati dai lupi. Di notte a Bill gli ululati facevano rizzare i capelli. Quando cadeva un acquazzone improvviso, le gocce erano palline d'umidità pesanti e fredde, un pungente promemoria del fatto che lì l'estate era breve. I due uomini a malapena si scambiavano qualche parola, mentre la loro goffa imbarcazione vorticava e radonda nel canale. A Bill, un ragazzo di campagna, biondo, robusto del Vermont, sfuggivano occasionali esclamazioni alla vista di un'aquila reale che volteggiava sulle loro teste o di una macchia brillante di cavenario purpureo. Joe, un irlandese muscoloso del South Carolina, nella migliore delle ipotesi non si poteva definire un gran chiacchierone, guardava avanti a sé, aggrappato ad un remo. I due americani erano stanchi e troppo stufi della reciproca compagnia per fare molta conversazione. C'erano voluti 3 mesi per arrivare lì, un viaggio che aveva incluso valanghe, tempeste di neve, una scalata quasi verticale, violente rapide e insidiosi vortici e facce così gonfiate dai morsi degli insetti da riuscire a malapena ad aprire gli occhi. Adesso erano lontani da qualsiasi segno di civiltà. Non c'erano città, fattorie, ferrovie o linee del telegrafo per centinaia di miglia. Avevano quasi raggiunto il circolo artico. Bill e Joe viaggiavano lungo il fiume Yukon, il corso d'acqua che serpeggia per 2000 miglia attraverso conifere, tundra e ghiaccio nel Far Nord. Dalle sorgenti a sole 50 miglia dalla costa del Pacifico, il fiume scorre verso il polo fino ad arrivare a circa 120 miglia dall'Oceano Artico. Poi curva a sud-ovest per scorrere altre 1200 miglia attraverso foreste impenetrabili e scuri acquitrini. Le zanzare sono terribili, il panorama a tratti spettacolare e in altri punti spaventoso o monotono. Infine, dopo aver tagliato un immenso arco nel centro dell'Alaska, il fiume si sparpaglia nei molti rami di un ampio delta poco profondo, prima di raggiungere l'acqua salata del mare di Bering, nel punto più alto della costa occidentale del Nord America. Coperto da uno strato di ghiaccio, spesso alcuni piedi, per 7 o 8 mesi all'anno, il possente corso dello Yukon è ancora oggi esplorato solo per metà. Perché Bill Haskell e Joe Meeker fluttuavano attraverso questa landa desolata, i pugni stretti per la paura? Quale brama li spingeva a viaggiare così lontano, a fronteggiare tali pericoli? Perché l'oro aveva attratto al nord i due uomini. Negli anni 90 del XIX secolo l'oro era tanto importante quanto lo è il petrolio oggi. Faceva girare il mondo. Era fondamentale per i governi perché il valore della moneta di ogni nazione dipendeva dai suoi possedimenti di oro e il denaro e il credito per l'espansione economica dipendevano dalle sue crescenti riserve. E come il petrolio oggi, nella seconda metà dell'Ottocento le riserve di oro sembrarono assottigliarsi, determinando una stretta economica a livello mondiale. Le banche fallirono, le file per il pane si allungavano.
That's why we are going on strike with the most fasting today. The rest of the chapter you can find in the translation which has been handed out. The beginning, the introduction, which was done into Italian by Tiziana Campellini, is also with those pages. Finally, our celebrated biographer can speak. Sorry for keeping him too long.
Well, it was such a pleasure to hear the first chapter in a melodic translation by Maury. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the Centro Siena-Toronto and the Institute of Canadian Studies for inviting me here to speak today. It's an enormous honor and a great pleasure. But you've heard many thanks from other people, so I think I'm going to take you straight into the story, if I may, because I'm going to tell you a little about why I wrote the book and why I found the north of Canada so mesmerizing, as have so many others from all over the world. Interestingly, the north has always been important for Canada. Up until the early 19th century, it was in fact what then British North America was best known for, as a source of primary materials. But in this case, it was of course the fur trade the great trading companies, the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company, approached Canada from the north, from the passageways into the Hudson Bay, to harvest the enormous stocks of beaver and other wild animals, their pelts, to bring back to Europe. For if you go and look at the pictures in the museums throughout Italy, and I'm sure here in Siena, you'll see the wonderful fur hats that particularly in the 18th century were so fashionable. Much of that came from Canada. But it went out of fashion as fashions change. And by the early 19th century, the fur trade was slowly losing its market. And Canada was transforming itself into an agricultural country. There were immigrants pouring in from all over the world, but particularly from Europe. A lot of Italians came to Canada in the mid and late 19th century, and they were settling the new cities, they were settling, Eastern Europeans were settling the prairies, and Canada was transforming itself into an agricultural country. It became what's known as the breadbasket of the British Empire, and the North was almost forgotten. It was still busy. There was still any number of Aboriginal people in the North who'd lived there for centuries and who were continuing their traditional way of life. But as far as the Canadians of European origin were concerned, the North was forgotten. But then, in August 1896, an American called George Carmack, with his Tagish is a northern people, with his Tagish wife and her brother and cousin, were gold prospecting in a pretty casual way on a creek called Rabbit Creek in the Yukon, which is a territory that covers the beginning of this vast Yukon River. The Yukon River, 2,000 miles long, which begins in its headwaters are in north of the Western Canadian province of British Columbia, slowly moves up, almost pours into the Arctic Ocean, but then takes a dramatic turn west and flows slowly through Alaska to the Bering Sea. George Carmack and his family were prospecting on one of the tributaries of a river that flows into the Yukon River, knowing there was gold up there, but not really working terribly hard to find it. And one of them found an enormous streak of gold. They said it was so large, it was like cheese in a sandwich. Pretty luscious. And it kicked off a gold rush that began in August 1896, but because of the brutal climate of the North, because in the winter it is impossible, almost impossible, to travel into the North, to travel over the mountains from the North Pacific Ocean into the land that surrounds the Yukon River, it didn't really get going until 1897. And just to move forward quite fast, what that gold rush did was draw people, mainly Americans, but a lot of Europeans, a lot of Canadians, a lot of Italians, and I saw their bodies in the cemetery, I didn't see their bodies, I saw their graves, in the cemeteries of Dawson City, which was the center of the gold rush. It drew them to this unknown land, a land that had been forgotten for half a century, the Canadian North. So I wanted to write a book about this event, the Canadian Gold Rush, the biggest gold rush Canada has ever seen, and the last great gold rush of the 19th century. There were many gold rushes in the century. You will have heard of the California Gold Rush, the Australian Gold Rush. The Canadian Gold Rush, the Klondike Gold Rush, was the last great gold rush of the 19th century. And it brought all these people north. And I wanted to find out what happened to those people. I knew that the journey was brutal. One of the most evocative pictures that I don't think there's a single Canadian doesn't have sort of emblazoned on their eyebrows, on their eyeballs, is this picture, which is of miners climbing the Chilkoot Pass, a very, very high pass that's really only passable for about 3 months of the year, over the St. Elias Mountains from the North Pacific, where they've arrived by boat, to the headwaters of the Yukon River. When they got to the headwaters, they still had to build boats themselves. They couldn't take boats over this pass. Look how much they're already carrying. And it was a brutally vertical pass. They still had to build boats when they got to the other side and float down the Yukon River for 600 miles until they got to Dawson City, which was the center of the gold rush. Just to tell you a little about Dawson City. In 1896, August, when George Carmack found that gold, it was a mud flat, just an empty piece of ground that the local Hahn fishermen used in the spring because they fished there. And it had a population of maybe 200 people, 1896. 1899, August 1899, it had a population of 30,000 people. 30,000. And I hope that your English is good enough to understand what I'm going to say next. I should have found it in Italian. 30,000 people. 3 public toilets. One of the things about history is it smells. And could somebody... Lara is going to tell you what I've just said, I think. Because I realized it was an extraordinary mushroom of a town that grew on the mudflat. And it was a pretty uncomfortable life. This is what Dawson City looked like. There was a few people were able to find enough wood to build cabins, but most people were in tents. And you can see, if you look at the tents, you can see the stovepipes coming out of the top. Can't find the pointer, but you can see the stovepipes coming out of the top there. You can see that, in fact, it's an incredibly ramshackle and crowded place because the hills start only about a mile or half a mile from the river bank. And those who didn't get there in the first rush had to start building on the hills behind the town. And those tents were home to probably in most cases 2, 3, 4 people the gold rushers, the prospectors, and you can see in this picture everything you need to be a prospector. You can see the gold pan in the center there with gravel in it that they're hoping is going to yield some gold nuggets or flakes at the bottom. You can see the scales that the men are using so that they can weigh the gold flakes that they've got to see if they've got enough, an ounce, which was then worth $20. Play with that for a minute. $20 an ounce. Today, gold is nearly $1,800 an ounce. You can see on the right the fur blanket on the cot that he sleeps on. These men were sleeping in tents when the temperature would go 20 degrees below zero. It was freezing. And you can also see another way that they kept warm on the table, the bottle of whiskey. It was not a life where it was almost all the people in Dawson in the very early months were men, and they had to do everything themselves. They had to do their washing and their cooking, and these were not men who had any clue how to do that on the whole. Their health was terrible as a result. More people died of scurvy, the disease that you get from not enough vitamin C in your diet, and there's very little available in the north, than died of accidents crossing that fearsome Chilkoot Pass. And they were dirty, they were hungry, and they were malnourished, but they were driven by the appetite for gold. There were women up there, and I wanted to explore this. One of the things I've done in my career as a writer is to see what role women have played in Canadian history, because it is a country where the settlement patterns and the challenges of the landscape have made it a very macho country. You had to be strong, you had to explore, you had to climb mountains, you had to lay railway lines, and of course all the politicians were men. And quite often I discovered when I first moved to Canada, because originally I'm from England, I realized that there were hardly any books about women in Canadian history. And I knew there must be some. And I knew that in Dawson there were some. And I started looking. And of course many of the women in Dawson were not the kind who'd be at a elevated occasion like today. This, for instance, is Snake Hips Lulu, one of the dancers, who probably made more money than most of the miners up in Dawson. And she was one of a whole group of entertainers who were up in the north. There were about 3 grades of women up in the north. There were respectable women and wives who'd gone up there, usually with husbands or brothers. There were entertainers like Snake Hips, who entertained in the casinos, the bars, the dance halls, and also danced with the men. And then, of course, there were the last group, who are the best known, which were the Dawson hookers, who are still celebrated in Dawson in memory, because they also made far more money than most of the prospectors. But I knew that there must be other women, I knew there must be other stories besides this macho story of men climbing the Chilkoot Pass and then nearly killing themselves to find gold, and when they found the gold, spending it all in Dawson City, the wild frontier town, which was full of bars and dance halls and casinos and saloons. But you can see, looking at this picture, this is August 1898, you can see people were streaming into Dawson. Most of them, in fact, never got anywhere near the gold fields, which were themselves 14 miles outside Dawson City, on the creeks flowing into a river called the Klondike, which flows into the Yukon River. Most of these men had made the fearsome journey to Dawson, thinking as soon as they got there they would be able to just start digging and find gold. Got there, discovered that all the claims had been staked, that there was very little chance of them ever finding any gold. They were exhausted, they were appalled, and they knew that unless they turned around right away and got out, they'd be trapped there for the winter, because the winter was 8 months long. And so they arrived, and they just wandered around Front Street, which is the street overlooking the river, wondering blindly how to get home and what they were doing there. There are very few women in that picture, no children, just a lot of bedraggled men. But in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see one of the symbols of Canada, which had arrived to keep order. You can see some Mounties in their Stetson hats. Now, I took 6 individuals to build the story of Dawson around. And the first one I don't have a picture of, although he probably looked very like the man on the cover of the book. And he is in some ways every man, because he was the prospector. His name was Bill Haskell, and he wrote a book about being a gold miner in the 1896-97 period in Dawson. And he and his partner Joe, you heard a little about in the introduction, they were already in Alaska when they heard about this incredible gold strike, and they immediately rushed over to the Yukon, built a boat, and went to Dawson. And these boats, in fact, are a sort of rough approximation. This is a few months after Bill had arrived there, but this is how these homemade boats, they floated down the Yukon River as soon as the ice had gone out, so that would be about May or June, and they all had to be homemade. You can see the front one obviously has British prospectors in it, because they're loyally flying the Union Jack, or it could be Canadians, but they're all desperately moving as fast as they can to the gold city, Dawson. Bill Haskell spent a winter on a creek in a tent, and when he left Dawson a year later, he wrote a book called 2 Years in the Goldfields of Alaska and the Yukon. And he wrote it to warn people not to go. He said, it is so horrible, it is so cruel. You dig all winter through the frozen muck, building this huge pile of earth that you hope when spring comes and the water starts flowing, you'll be able to find some gold dust in. And he and Joe, his partner, had very little luck until the last few weeks when they were up there. For a long time it looked as though they'd staked a dud claim and they weren't going to get anything. He wrote a book saying, don't go there, it's cruel. But he couldn't resist that little sort of macho twist. And he subtitled his book, A Thrilling Adventure. And of course, people read this. There was still a terrible depression in North America. It was only just lifting, but for 20, 30 years, the economies of Canada and North America and United States had been very depressed. People were on the breadline, banks were failing, and the dream of gold in the north just sucked people and sent them north. So Bill Haskell was the first one I wrote about, the first gold digger. But the second one was somebody who was not interested in yellow metal at all. The second one was a Jesuit priest, Father William Judge, who became the saint of Dawson, who built a hospital, who built a chapel, and who the men, to begin with, just despised. They were all after gold. They thought, what is this man here bothering about our souls for? But Father William Judge had lived with the Aboriginal peoples, and he knew how to deal, for example, with scurvy, the vitamin C deficiency disease, and he was able to cure people. And gradually, he won the respect of some of these really hardcore, hardline miners, and he won their respect, and they started just giving him, a few nuggets towards the costs of building his hospital, building his chapel, and he eventually became such an incredibly revered figure in the community that he became the saint of Dawson. He was twice the age of most of the miners and very frail, and he withstood these incredible winters. The third person I wrote about, a wonderful entrepreneur called Belinda Mulrooney, Irish-American, grown up. She was a coal miner's daughter from Scranton, Pennsylvania. She'd made a fortune before she was 21, operating a restaurant at the Chicago World's Fair in 1892, and she came to Dawson because she knew where there were hungry, tired men, there were opportunities. She arrived in the summer of 1897, and she brought with her, over the Chilkoot Pass, long aluminium tubes. And everybody said, what's in those aluminium tubes? And she refused to tell anybody until she arrived. And when she arrived, she set up a little store on the riverbank and opened the tubes. And inside was the most gorgeous, silky, filmy women's underwear, lingerie. And she knew that the women in Dawson had been starved for luxury, for something pretty. She sold these garments at about 400% profit, and within 6 weeks she had 3 businesses going. She was running a restaurant, she was running a boarding house, a construction business where she was building cabins for the miners, and she was also putting a roadhouse up near the Gold Creeks so that men didn't have to come down to Dawson when they wanted to have a bit of company and enjoy a few drinks. She was a really belligerent woman. Nobody took advantage of Belinda Mulrooney until she became the richest woman in Dawson, in the Yukon. She dared to build a 3-story hotel, and she financed this hotel because she knew that there was going to be a demand for it by taking bets from all the other entrepreneurs and construction kings in Dawson. She took bets from them that it couldn't be done, and she did it in the time that she said she would. And when she collected up all her winnings, they paid for the construction costs of the hotel. She was one very smart woman. This is perhaps one of the very best known of the people who went up to Dawson, and not many people realize that Jack London, the American short story writer, began his career by writing up the stories that he had enjoyed hearing in the bars of Dawson when he was there in 1897 to 1898. Jack London was a terrible miner. He staked a claim in the wrong area. He upset all the people he was with because he was so argumentative. He got the most awful case of scurvy because he didn't look after himself, he didn't eat properly. Father Judge, like you saw earlier, saved him. But Jack London used the literary gold that he had found in the Dawson bars to write books that, within 3 years of him leaving Dawson, became international bestsellers. And I don't know, do you know what's the title of this, The Call of the Wild? Because this will be published in Italian, I know. It's, you all know. Yeah. It made him incredibly famous. And he went on from then to have all kinds of other adventures. But unless he had gone to the Yukon when he was still in his early 20s, we'd never have heard of him. Before that, he'd tried to be a writer. He'd sent off all kinds of short stories and articles to different magazines and journals, and they'd all been turned down. They'd all been returned. But the magic of his observations about the North, about the sound of the animals, about the northern lights, about the sound of snow crunching under your boots, about the look of the sky on a crystal clear night, all these observations and his wonderful descriptions of the men he met in the bars, they were what lifted his fiction off the page. But as I said, I always wanted to know, I knew there were more people in Canadian history and in Dawson than just very rough types who could survive the conditions. And I was thrilled to find this woman, Flora Shaw, who in fact made more difference to the future of Dawson, probably, than anybody else, although she was only there for 3 weeks in the summer of 1898. She was the correspondent from the Times of London. She was very grand. And she went to see what were the prospects, what was the potential of this gold mine that was so far away, so unobtainable, so inaccessible, and where the costs of getting the gold seemed to be so high because you had to ship in the provisions and the machinery and everything. And she was appalled when she got there, but she, by the conditions and by the costs, and also she listened to the fury of the American miners who felt that the Canadian government was charging them far too much tax. Some things never change. And she wrote about how the Canadian government was corrupt and the Americans were working hard, and then the Canadians were taking their profit. She wrote reports that were extraordinarily powerful in terms of getting British banks and financial houses to invest. And in fact, thanks to her, a railway was built, an extraordinary engineering achievement from the coast to Whitehorse, which right over these fearful mountains, which is where you could then go by steamer to the Dawson, the centre of the gold fields. And the last person I wrote about was the representative of Canadian government, Canadian order, Colonel Sam Steele, who ran the Mounties, went up there in 1898 to this lawless, free town that was growing far too fast and was getting out of control. He laid down the law. It's often said that Canadians are a very law-abiding people, and one of the most fascinating things about Dawson, when you compare it with the other mining towns, particularly in the US West, was that it was much more lawful, much more conventional, in fact, than some of the Californian gold rush towns, and that's largely because of the Northwest Mounted Police who went up there with Sam Steele in charge. So I had a wonderful time because I spent 3 months up in the north these are the letters that I used that for Sam Steele, which are all now in the University of Alberta. He wrote to his wife Marie, and they were a marvelous resource to really understand what it was like to be way, way, way up there, completely out of touch with the rest of the world for 8 months of the year. This is pre-telegraph, let alone pre-telephone, pre-everything else, pre-internet, pre-planes, pre-any kind of communication. So I spent a wonderful 3 months, and then I went back 2 years later researching the book and realizing really that the Yukon landscape itself was a character in the book I was writing. Dawson is still there. I have to say it looks like a rather tacky film set, as you can see, particularly in April when all the snow is melting. For the first 3 weeks I was there, I wore rubber boots every single day, and anybody who's been up at this time of year knows that phenomenon. It's just a sea of mud. But the buildings are all the same false-fronted buildings as were put up in the late 19th, early 20th century. When I first arrived, there was an ice bridge over the Yukon River. That's May the 3rd. I remember seeing a pickup truck driving over it that day. The following day, everybody rushed down to the riverbank because somebody sounded a siren. The ice had gone out, and suddenly this enormous river was flowing. It was an incredibly exciting moment, and it was particularly exciting for me because in all the accounts of the gold rush, I had read miners' accounts of how their hearts lifted as they realized their isolation in the north was about to end because finally their only channel of communication was open. But that's today's Dawson residents enjoying the same moment. This is where the gold rush ended quite quickly. There was another gold rush further west, and most of the miners left and went into Alaska. And all the steamers that had been built to take them up the Yukon or down the Yukon, came from both directions, were suddenly empty and useless. They were these flat, hastily built boats made out of wood, and they were just pulled up onto the bank and left there. And it's now called the paddle steamer graveyard. They do have paddle steamers today, but they're strictly for the tourists, and they don't look like anything like the original ones. Everywhere you go in Dawson, you see evidence of the gold rush. Here's somebody's wood pile outside their house with, of course, a gold pan just hanging there along with the furs, because so many people up north still, at the drop of a hat, will go off into the bush and start panning for gold in the streams. It's a lust, it's an appetite, it's an addiction. That's me and my trusty research assistant. And the reason I've included this is that the creek on which the original gold find was made by George Carmack was called Rabbit Creek. It was rapidly renamed Bonanza. And before I got to the north, I thought, this Bonanza Creek must be as big as the Arno. I thought it must be a big, powerful, important river. And I discovered it was only about 2 feet wide and sluggish, and I couldn't believe it had started a global gold rush. In this graveyard, the cemetery in Dawson, you can see many of the graves of the markers of people who lost their life up there. It was a pretty rough town, and most of them didn't live till past the age of 40. This is Father Judge's grave, the only stone grave marker in Dawson, and the town ground to a halt when he died in January 1899, and everybody went to his church to pay their respects. This is this is the poster child, really, for Dawson, which you're going to hear a lot about later on from Tony. This is the effects of 100 years of permafrost on buildings, very wobbly foundations. I stayed in this house for 3 months it's a writer's residence, while I was researching the book. And this is just to give you some sense of the landscape that the men and women had to travel through to reach the gold fields. Again, I didn't do it in quite such a hardship way, my research assistant and me. And here, this is panning for gold. I tried it. It's hard work. I don't advise anybody with back problems or who's over the age of 30 to try. But all the time you're surrounded, as you look at the north, by the most extraordinary landscape. So that was what the gold rush was all about. You're going to hear later about some of the scientific underpinnings and the imaginative, cultural and creative results of Canadians rediscovering the north, but I thought you'd like a taste of history. Thank you very much.
Perhaps you would like to ask some questions now rather than keep them secret for later on during the day. Are there any questions, or would you like to ask? One curiosity. Either you come to the front, I don't know where the roaming system works.
Oh, anyway, just a quick question. Got a curiosity. How many people, more or less, did found all the richness in this rush?
The 100,000 people left to travel to the gold rush. About 40,000 of them reached Dawson City. 20,000 of them staked claims. Of those 20,000, about 1,500 found gold. Of those 1,500, about 200 found gold in any significant quantities. And of those 200, probably only about 50 managed to get it out of the Yukon. The rest flew it in the saloons, the bars. There were plenty of people who got very rich on the gold rush, particularly the outfitters in Seattle and San Francisco, and the people who ran the bars and the saloons, and people like Belinda Mulroney in Dawson. Most of the miners, though, had one hell of a good time, according to their own memoirs, but they didn't come away rich.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for your presentation. I only received a beautiful sense of the Canadian wilderness and not the smell from Dawson City. I found it, I just read excerpts from your book, and I found the beginning of the first chapter very interesting, and sort of a non-fiction version of Jack London's Love for Life, very thorough. My question is more of a technical or stylistic question. In your preface, you're describing your trip with your son along the river, and in the first chapter, basically the same words are repeated. Is that to show that nothing has changed, or the reason for this repetition? Thank you.
You could debate this with my editor, who had the same, raised the same question. Why did I repeat the same words in the first sentence of both the introduction and the first chapter? And it was because I was trying to show that nothing has changed, and that the impact of the landscape on travellers today is just as immense, as it, despite all the changes of the last 100 years, as it was 100 years ago.
Other questions? Laura?
Sorry for the silly question, but usually when you think of the north, you think about dangers such as bears, the snow, the ice, the frost. What about the mosquitoes? Are still there?
Oh, yeah.
Well, in fact, I should be talking to the other people who've been up north about the issue of mosquitoes, because every single memoir about the gold rush, people talk about how incredibly stifling and overwhelming the mosquitoes and the black flies were, how uncomfortable it was in the spring when the snow starts melting, and how it was just, you were constantly sort of brushing them off your face. And I have to say, I think it's something to do with that terrible smell, Because in Dawson, I wasn't really bothered. I was once or twice when I was outside the Dawson city itself, I realized that there are these huge mosquitoes, but they didn't bother me in the way that the people who wrote the memoirs were. I mean, the wildlife was extraordinary. I saw bears and moose, caribou, porcupines, and lynx. I mean, it is, and you really feel you're an intruder. This is their country. But the mosquitoes, I was prepared for. I took more mosquito repellent than you can believe, and I realized I didn't really use it much. So I don't know what happened to the mosquitoes. Let's ask some of the other speakers.
Other questions? Okay, so I think when Piero is ready to show something of the screen, we invite Rita to talk now. Before we begin with her, though, I would like to ask not Charlotte, but the students and their teachers for one single word, which translates in Italian, which translates the phrase pan for gold. I want one more, please. Come si dice pan for gold? Ma setacciare what? Mica setacciare gold. There is no word. It's like spaghetti, so we always say pan for gold.
Pan spaghetti.
And so now, please, Arita, it would take ages to present her from her CV, which is, I don't know, 60 pages long. She has written and worked so much on Canadian literature, and she's so well versed on the North. Now we'll have a journey, as I
you
said
can use
at the
this one to
beginning,
go forward with the pages. This one.
on the wings of imagination. If the students miss the words, just listen to the sound and just imagine, because when you go north you have to imagine. That's the only truth that can hold all the time. Thank you, Anita, very much. I'm sorry I didn't bring some of her books, but I promise she has written a lot.
Thank you, Laura. It's such an honor to be here at the University of Siena. He wants a photograph. Which is a place that is culturally...
I think we have to stand in front of that thing.
Okay. Which is a place that is culturally so much richer and older than the world where we live. I made a terrible mistake. I wrote a very writer-like paper, which will, I promise you, put you to sleep.
Okay.
So, I'm going to read the paper, but we've put it up on the screen so that you can follow if you wish, or you can dream, and hopefully my images, because I am a writer, will at least give you ideas for your own ideas of North. Because I think North is a universal metaphor for desire and for dreaming. As Charlotte has already so beautifully indicated, it's also a place where we go in order to search for all the secrets of our soul. So I apologize in advance. Sometimes writers are trapped by their own words, and we get so excited about writing that we become absolutely crazy. I have been a writer for years. I have written 11 books, of which I think almost every one of them in some way points toward the North. My characters end up going north. My characters end up running away from north. And in the book that I probably explored the north in best, Places Far from Ellesmere, I effectively examined how the north helps us to read, how the north makes us read differently. So forgive me for reading this. As I discovered when I found myself reading Anna Karenina while hiking on Lake Hazen on Ellesmere Island, the act of reading in the north becomes an entirely different activity than when undertaken in the slow comfort of southern Canada. Reading in the north is an intensified act, a show of light, and the printed page, which is almost anachronistic there, takes on the texture of an entirely new lexical engagement. The northern context alters the perimeters of words to bring a regenerated perspective to the reading act. Okay? So I'm trying to talk about how the north makes us read differently, even if we have always been readers, and I began reading when I was 3 years old, so I can't remember ever not reading. You can tell my addiction. That's why my eyesight is so bad. Canadian critic Cheryl Grace has observed in a wonderfully prescient review of the Reading Act that there are many ways of going north. And as Stephen Leacock knew, the safest way is in your favorite armchair before a fire with a good drink and an explorer's account of his or her adventures. Those who experience the north seem compelled to write about their experiences, as if they were encounters too solemn or monumental to be kept private, as if the north wreaks a powerful transformation impossible to avoid, and demanding articulation, a witnessing to the virtually religious occasion of having gone north. My greatest interest is located in how those who make pilgrimage north are read by the north, and who, in reading the north, discover their reading practice irrevocably changed. Does this help, or does it drive you crazy? The text? Okay. So you understand that I'm a writer trying to figure out how to read differently in the north, because you do read very differently. And of course, I discovered that instead, the north is reading me. Now, what I would usually do when I am reading this paper is I would show pictures of the north. But today, you are going to see those pictures later when Robert Sharp, who is my wonderful husband, is going to show you the images that evoke this. He's not going to say very much, but his pictures are fantastic. So if you can remember what I'm saying about the idea of north, you will see photographic representation of it later. So in the north, words perform strange antics, as if they were islands in a perplexing horizon, yearning to be discovered even while they slip away, elusive and shadowy. Reading in the north is a different undertaking than it is below the Arctic Circle. Indeed, reading in the north suggests spider filaments of sorcery and magic, of the estrangement that makes reading not the usual cognitive process, but an act entirely other. Now, perhaps I should retrace my steps and claim that it is impossible to read in the north, that language performs a different and utterly alien mediation in that incredibly mysterious world. Now, I cannot help but notice my own tarnished and limited language here. Mysterious world, magical space, sorcery and engagement, distant space, undefinable element. In this dream landscape that North embraces, the personal and its presence raise questions and uncertainty that the North inspires in and of itself, refusing to be quantifiable or measurable. It's both an inviting imaginary and an actual space so feverishly overwhelming, and Charlotte depicted that incredibly well when she was showing us how everyone was so overwhelmed by their lust for gold, but that was certainly enhanced by the landscape. So feverishly overwhelming, then it cannot even be looked at in order to be seen or read, refusing thus any desire to pin it down. And in that refusal, it performs a marvelous act of slippage, a sleight of hand that camouflages every possible design and certainly every possible designation, because this is truly both an elusive and vanishing North. So I have learned that it becomes impossible to read in the North. And having been North, and I have been North many times, it becomes impossible to read words about the North without those images of the real North jostling. Sorry, I can't. Oh, okay. I'm not used to doing this. Jostling with the designated words for its altered attention. We all become the writer walking into the northern landscape and thinking about what she says and does, sees and does, and examining this in the light of what she has previously thought, read, and done. In short, it alters our perception. This is profoundly correct. The voice of the writer in the North is altered by the space in which that voice echoes. Now, in a world determinedly swept by ice and snow, we've had to invent new metaphors to celebrate that distinctive natural world, even while we're hesitant to claim the wonder and the transcendent potential of ice as our real element in Canada. Ice presents an association with iron. As Wayne Grady has pointed out, ice is water turned to bone. It is worth quoting Grady's incredible essay when he quotes Larry Solar, who's an ice observer, who says, "Ice represents the last frontier on this planet. In the south, we have distance barriers. The prairies are a long way from the seaports, the grain farms are a long way from the elevators. Or we have feature barriers, mountains and rivers and such that get between you and where you want to go. But up here, meaning in the north, we have a substance barrier, which is ice. Whenever we want to do anything, find oil, examine science, or just go farther than anyone has gone before, we have to deal with ice. Ice becomes an element like air or fire, an obsession because it is pure form. I know what Nirmal meant when he held his great chunk of ice up to the sun and said, erotica. Now, only a Canadian would think that, right? That ice is erotic. So that same exoticism and eroticism is surely present at the opening of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's most evocative novel, 100 Years of Solitude. What is its title in Italian? Thank you. You know the book to which I refer? And it begins like this. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Arliana Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. The discovery of ice is a shock to the South American system, a logic-defying connection with the fiercest of colds. To Buendia, this ice is miraculous, a mystery that refuses to divulge the nature of its pneuma. His heart filled with fear and jubilation as he touches this exotic substance, and he declares, "This is the great invention of our time." His son imagines using ice blocks to build houses that will change Macondo from a burning place into a wintry city, transforming the cruel heat of the town's actual character. That it should take a South American writer to teach us to revere ice is a shocking omission on the part of Canadian literature, perhaps. But it does, of course, remind us that we seldom recognize our own exoticisms or eroticisms. We live them, but we don't really look at them. So we will doubtless begin to fetishize ice more and more as it enacts its slow climate change disappearing act. Although, as substance and idea, I am certain that it will perform indefinitely within the Canadian zeitgeist. But let me return to origins, the North as a geographical fancy, a metaphor for location, and an illusion of where we are or want to be. As one of the four cardinal directions, North functions as far more than opposite to South. And to the chagrin of those who live in the southern hemispheres, it is always the top side of any map. If you ever talk to Australians about this, they get very upset. They would like a map that turns everything upside down so that Australia is the top of the world instead of Canada. Well, maybe the Russians think it's the top of the world. So the use of the North as being the top of the world to define all other directions, the effect of that is dubious, does make North a fixed point, or does it limit it to the horizon offside, a distant punctuation mark that we never need to note? North is specifically the direction that is treated as the destination. To go north has become a Canadian phrase, a delicious exile, a promise and a hope. As a writer whose imagination was shaped by the Canadian North, I persistently yearn for a vocabulary to encapsulate its elusive and elusive character. The North is an idea, but it is also far more than an idea. It is, as Cheryl Grace has summarized, multiple, shifting, and elastic. It is a process, not a fixed goal or condition. As a process, it evades all attempts that might press it into the service of art or industry alike. Yet, both artists and critics are fascinated by the North's allure, which is why writing North is an endless venture, deliciously inconclusive. The connection to writing as its own process, of course, offers a Canadian continuum, compelling, the tentative artificer to move into that daunting and inexpressible terrain. Robert Crouch says, to write is, in some metaphoric sense, to go north. To go north is, in some metaphoric sense, to write. So it becomes our own conundrum. So to writers who go north and who write north, the biggest challenge is writing northerns. Now, there's a wonderful poem by John Creary, which is quoted here. The great northern poem has not been written, no, but it is here. It's there. North of your first breath, north of your free speech, north of going bald or being blind, north of crumpled papers filling the wicker basket like a small castle, all those pages we throw away, north of all that, north of a dark mountain cave and north of a dead house pet, north of the conversations with strangers in the wind or at the bus stop. I assure you, it's north of where you sit and north of this moment, but just north of this poem, stumbling through a blizzard. This is what I meant to show you. So you can see that it becomes a metaphor for us as dream and nightmare, muse and conjuring, because it combines the ordinary and the familial, the political and the climactic and the mythic. Its meditation on the most metaphysically evocative part of Canada acknowledges both the attraction of the image and the writer's own need to excursion there, to travel there. But the north that is ventured is also a north that exerts a profound influence over what the north is not. The north that has never been written, even while it calibrates all that is still inspirational. Now this is no closed and fixed system, but it is a kind of Vorstellung for all Canadians, not only writers or artists. Every Canadian dreams about it, every Canadian wants to go there, although they do not know it as well as they should, because sadly Canadians are repeat offenders in their ignorance about their most distinctive of geographies. Very few Canadians have gone farther north than Edmonton, and that is only on a level with Edinburgh. Okay? So we are our own worst enemies in trying to discover our most distinctive geographical feature. Perhaps because we do not travel there, the north haunts the Canadian imagination, because it hovers as this immeasurable force just beyond the shoulder of our daily business, our habitual inclination toward commerce and the South. If the Western is the genre that serves as morality tale for the United States, then the Northern is surely Canada's morality tale. So the writer seeking to write a Northern must bend to its magnetic charge, and reading North has to try to tolerate her incipient blindness. In my long life desire, or my lifelong desire, to write a Northern, I'm also trying to articulate my personal quest. In answer to one of the many unanswered questions posed in Robert Croce's essay, Why I Went Up North and What I Found When He Got There. You notice that the pronoun changes there. Croce's question, for all that his essay remains so evocative, doesn't encompass the effect of that journey. I have not gone north, although I have traveled there many times. Going north implies living there, implies becoming a northern dweller. So the difference between traveling there, a kind of tourist act, and going there is the difference between visiting and staying. The miners, I think, thought of themselves as going north, but always knew that they would leave it. Of course, they thought they would leave it rich. So I search north of my own location and dreaming desire, and it remains tantalizingly north of me. Are you with me? I know it's awfully complicated. You should never let writers near a dictionary. You understand that. It's terrible. Accompanying the North's reading is his sinistral role as a space of exposition or possibility. The North is regarded by the Southern world as deflection, reflection, or justification. And despite that, its geography nevertheless remains inherently self-possessed. It is wonderfully indifferent to the way it has been used as a metaphor. Poems and compositions are written for and about the North. It's become the object and locus of inculcate obsession. But while positioned to reflect our puny desires and mysteries, it contains an essence that only it knows or exerts. It's endlessly intriguing to economic, ecological, social, and political, as well as artistic crusaders, but it nevertheless demonstrates a philosophical composure that resists all those pilgrims. Imperturbable, it performs a sang-froid that reflects both the exploitative and the awestruck. And so it remains elusively itself, a meditation of mystery and desire, absence and its dread companionship, melancholy and promise. It embodies mantra and miser, muse and metafiction. It fosters a hollow in the bones, an echo in space, a profound and resistant enactment of negative capability. It does speak to the strange configuration of Canada's imagination, the hymn of a country's collective myth, mapping the space of an aesthetic that virtually eludes its own destination, even while it traces compulsively that stairway to our version of heaven. And so we have made of North a Shangri-La, a paradise, a dream, a land of promise and plenty, although we do not quite dare to propose it as a land of milk and honey. Honey perhaps, but milk would freeze. Still, North is our Neverland and New Atlantis, our El Dorado and our Eden. North has even reseeded the definition of garden. Bearing the weight of this metaphorical and tangential moral burden would leave any lesser force diminished. But North, for all that it has been subject and mistress, destination and bête noire, magical or wretched, resists all that we have done to try and make it ours. So all these words with which we try to possess it are, of course, impossible because none of them effectively capture it. And so the challenge is for any writer to try and write a Northern. Perhaps I should argue that the beginning of the great Canadian novel, of which there have been many already written, would be the first time I went north, followed by the then of the narrative, its held breath. But that novel is contingent on a reading that does not partake of that armchair with elegant arms prepared to serve as a magic carpet. No, that novel must go north by evading its reading, must become part of its own unreading, a wandering, homeless reader intent on vanishing the text that entrances her. Now, I grew up in what I would describe as resolutely southern Canada. I grew up in the prairies of Alberta. I dreamed, nevertheless, early and late of the north. For me, it was the realm of imagination's tightwire, although, as a child growing up in Alberta's parkland, I never imagined that I would go any farther north than Edmonton, or perhaps Fort McMurray, already then abuzz below the surface of Alberta's prosperity. I thought of north as an abstraction that no words could be adequate to describe. It was a physical and conceptual place, intuitive, elemental, spiritual, beyond words and yet superlatively meaningful. I imagined it as a presence residing in the long light of midsummer, the way that the sun stretches toward a yearning haze that hangs like a corona over the whole of my recognizable and readable world. In winter, the effect of long twilights and deep blue nights was north. The cold when I whizzed my old metal runner's sleigh down the hill, the crisp invigoration of running to catch the school bus on mornings that were still sleepily gray. That was north. Our long lane was north. Our rough ice slough was north. The stars that hovered close to the earth were north. North was present yet peripheral, elusive as breathing or the dreams that visited sleep. and north read every gesture and habit that I knew I practiced and that I learned. It read me toward the frail kayak of language that I must use, and it read me toward the impossibility of writing north. Canadian musical genius Glenn Gould, who's already been mentioned today, early identified the North as a creative grail. He says, admittedly, it's a question of attitude, and I'm not sure that my own quasi-allegorical attitude toward the North is the proper way to make use of it, or even an accurate way in which to define it. Nevertheless, I'm by no means alone in this reaction to the North, that there are very few people who make contact with it and emerge unscathed. Something really does happen to people when they go into the North. They become aware of the creative opportunity which the physical fact of the country represents and come to measure their own work and life against that staggering creative possibility. His recognition that he is an outsider for whom the North is a convenient place to dream about, spin tall tales about, and in the end avoid, which is a wonderful conclusion, is aware of the North as a convenient locus of deflected desire. Most Canadians, while they might not pretend to know their North, nevertheless claim the North the way that we claim hockey and Anne of Green Gables and the maple leaf. It's ours, and it endures our obdurate misreadings. All Canadians know someone else who has gone north, even if they themselves never do, and they expect to read it as the locus of their desire. So the North's blank page is not so much fearsome as ferociously seductive for all of us. The greatest aphrodisiac is the delicate manumission of the unknown. And the Northern, then, has to be a love story, a reach toward the mystery of desire. Now, I've always planned to write a Northern, and instead of that, of course, I've found that I'm not really writing a Northern so much as trying to write a Northern, because Northerns refuse to be read as adventure stories or wilderness trips or tips or only diaries. Northerns are actually concerned with sleep, I would argue, how to sleep in a world where light and dark refuse to occupy their precise horizon, and how to read in a world either perpetually light or perpetually dark, because that means that there is no in-between. You have no twilight, which is the best moment to read. The moments when this passion was confirmed for me were unexpected. They caught me off guard. Flying up, and of course up is the word that we always use about the North, to Resolute Bay some years ago, the co-pilot came back through the passenger section of the freight passenger jet. It's a long trip from Yellowknife to Resolute Bay, and he was in no hurry. Started talking to me about traveling north. I was going to Little Cornwallis Island to spend Christmas with my husband at the mine. And he suddenly asked me if I would like to join him in the cockpit. Now you can understand that this was certainly before 9/11, because now nobody lets you into the cockpit. But it was the kind of cordial invitation that happened then, at least in planes that were going up north. It was December 23rd, which meant it was complete darkness. It was a liquid darkness more palpable than cloth. So I sat in the jump seat behind the pilot and the co-pilot, and I wondered at their confidence in destination. The landscape was completely invisible. It was unreadable. The sophistications of aviation navigation aside, I was puzzled at how they performed any destination. We were flying into darkness. The stars were sliding past us as if we were in outer space. And then, far below, out of sheer absence, shone a tiny line of lights, thin as a ladder, blinking a signal. Resolute Bay, a gravel airstrip where a jet, believe it or not, can land. The pilots took the plane down to earth as if the darkness were full sun, their fearlessness sobering. They knew and they believed in North, and I was still trying to figure out how to read its inscrutable darkness. Now, the famous Canadian writer Robert Crouch says, "The North makes possible a new story. It makes that story possible not through the encounter with the self, but rather through the astonishing encounter with an other that eradicates self into all its disparate potential." Now, I read fragments of that new story on another trip I took to Canada's most northerly park, Lake Hazen, on Ellesmere Island, where I read Anna Karenina and where I began to unread that book. And this is the book that resulted from that trip, Places Far from Ellesmere, where, of course, I imagine woman as an island. Ellesmere Island is north of all potential north. You can read comforting facts about it as much as you want. It is the third largest and most northerly of Canada's Arctic islands, etc., etc. It covers an area of almost 200,000 square kilometers. It's the 10th largest island on Earth. It's the most mountainous and the most glaciated of all the Arctic islands. Geography is so comforting because it, at least I think, offers us facts, which are also impossible to evade. But it is also sheer elemental space, and it is a north that dreams its own nordicity. It is not the near north or the far north, but the extreme north. And that's a difference in Canada that we make. There is the near north, which is just hovering by the Arctic Circle. There's the far north, and then there is the extreme north, the Arctic Islands, which are much closer to Russia than they are to southern Canada. There on Ellesmere, I learned that writing a northern is akin to writing toward home. And I came to understand the North not merely as the object of an outside gaze, but regards in return the rest of Canada, occasionally with one eyebrow raised, as a skeptical reader. Moving slowly up from the shore of ice-puzzled Lake Hazen, it became necessary to understand the prepositional hesitation of. All the verbiage, all the discourse, the metaphors and millstones within this language were erased by the immediacy of the landscape, so that Lake Hazen reached beyond the reach of even ideas. Ellesmere, a space suggesting more than any space declarable, and north of everything that I thought possible. Now, North found me again on a different journey, traveling with the Inuit across the ice between Resolute Bay and Grise Fiord, again a reference to the whole world of ice. We made that trip in the second week of May, which was full sun and mild weather. Mild weather to them meant only 20 below, a comfortable time of year for traveling because there is daylight, but it's still cold enough to get everywhere you want to go. And the vehicle, of course, is another matter, a sledge or komatik, a bouncing, creaking sledge over rough ice. Now, for a writer perpetually in search of northerns, we were pulled by a snarling snowmobile through, between, and within deep north. And that trip from Resolute Bay on Cornwallis Island to Lake Dungeness and the sea ice of Barrow Strait, and then up Wellington Channel before trekking over Devon Island, then down Vix Fjord and across Jones Sound to Grise Fiord. You notice how I'm relying on names to try and describe the journey, because the names are sometimes the only way you can distinguish where or who you are, and so they become important for that. We encountered huge ridges of jumbled ice, chunks of ice as big as houses, We pushed that damn komatik more than we rode in it. So in search of my buried pollard ear, I listened to our Inuit leader, Piamini, speaking Inuktitut, his quiet engagement with his own language and the world that he named. In his voice, I found a secret kernel of my own longing as a key to reading the North. And then I wrote what is perhaps the most pivotal the most pivotal essay of my life, where I talked about how the only way to understand that was to listen to Inuktitut. And so I have learned that the reading act of and within North is mostly the terrain of silence. I want to say here that the elements of North are not metaphorical. Barren lands are not barren, but sere and sparse with a withheld gaze, a glimpse of subtle classicism. This is a landscape unsullied by anything ornate. The beauty of this room is exactly the opposite to what you discover in the North. You have here a decoration that has so many allusions, and there the allusions are completely mysterious because they are so much without prior human contact. This is unsullied by the ornate, wonderfully elegant in its lack of decoration. To go north, then, is to engage with an active imagination that bears no resemblance to the bravado of expedition, of the language of the quest narrative, heroic and motivated by the prize of fame or fortune. To go north, I have discovered, is to consent to being read by the indecipherable grace and gaze of our indifferent suzerain. Shakespeare said, "A sad tale's best for winter," but he knew that humans ought to be shy about recording our exhilaration at the energies of North within our literary and physical domains. It is impossible to negate the North's capacity to inflect all those who go there, who put foot down on the gravel reaches of an Arctic shore, the springy, slightly crackling moss of the tundra, which feels underfoot like nothing else, part cushion, part cobblestone. Alutukipali has said, "I come from the Arctic," which has been a victim of so many words, so many books, and so many stories. Remember, he says victim. He located himself as the Arctic's brother and defender, a victim of so many words, perhaps, but also a space that knows how to read us, the puny humans who make pilgrimage there. It's said that a Canadian is a person who prides herself on enjoying bad weather and then bragging about the pleasure as if it were a virtue. I would wish to brag about how the North has read my desire to know it, to escape it, and to belong to the book that it writes about us. So, thank you. Thank you for my strange attempt to define what is really a conundrum.
So you have learned you have had a beautiful example of what to travel north means. If you have questions, please, this beautiful piece of writing will be sent to your teachers, and you can use it in schools or come here to listen to the recording. Again, you can come individually, you don't have to be a group to do so. And if you have a question, please ask them. It's very dangerous at this point to have a break. So I don't know whether we vote for a break or not. No break, and we'll go into the Italian very soon. But first I have to ask was going to be even more dense, this presentation, because we expected a professor from the University of London, Maury, who's a great admirer of Anita, and she would have asked the questions which she is asking electronically. So if you don't mind, I'll ask Anita what her reading of her books has triggered. So Anita, Maury Condé, who has often been here at the Center from the University of London, said, I loved Anita's paper, which she was going to comment here. And if I were there, I would ask, you argue very powerful for the imaginative power of the North for Canadians, and yet most Canadians live in the South. What does this say about the Canadians' concept of themselves?
Do you want to say the question in Italian?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
We are short of time.
We live in the South because it's very difficult to live in the North. Unless we are going north in order to look for gold, or because we are geographers in search of the inscrutable that we cannot find anywhere else. We live in the South because the South is really the easiest place to live. It is a question of convenience and of politics and geographical contiguity. So again, it's another example of the contradictoriness of Canadians, that they claim to be northern people, but they all live within 100 miles of the American border. And of course, that's another topic.
Yes, and Glenwood,
we have to go over here.
think has never been north.
No, I think he went to Georgian Bay.
Maury Condé also says, your beautiful paper made me think. This is intertextual, as I loved the reference to 100 años de soledad, 100 anni di solitudine. Non avevo mai notato che c'era una celebrazione del ghiaccio proprio nella prima frase di quel libro, che l'avevo sempre sentito come un libro del sud americano. Finding Ice in 100 Years of Solitude was a surprise that Rita gave us. In any case, instead, Maury Condé has been provoked to think of another work, Moby Dick, and she says, your beautiful paper made me think time and again of Moby Dick. Do you think Canadian writing about the North is trying to contain and capture it in print, as Melville attempted to contain and capture the whale? A slimy thing.
That's a wonderful question, because Moby Dick is, of course, the American iconographic novel. But you see, this whale, for all that it reappears and disappears, is a quantifiable animal. And the North is not animal, not vegetable. I would argue that the North is an act of the imagination that kind of, you probably have a wonderful word for it, which we don't have in English, which is like the dream that sneaks into your head when you are asleep and that you can never escape. Sometimes it is a nightmare. Sometimes it is the most delicious and wonderful and comforting dream. Sometimes it is an erotic dream. And I think that for us, it's a very different entity than the whale that needs to be hunted, found, and of course often defeated. So I would say that instead it's a dream idea more than that. But it's a wonderful question.
Yes, and another, well, I think this is an easier question. You mentioned Glenn Gould. In your opinion, might music or painting be a more appropriate response to the North than writing? I would add my own comment and say yes, because as Oscar Wilde said, music has many meanings, as man has moods, so it seems does the North, but I don't want to invade your terrain.
I think that says it very clearly, because music is so evocative and can be heard in different ways by the listener. It has a capacity for capturing ineffable spaces like that much better. Paintings, I think, struggle to contain it and almost always fail. There are, of course, many, many, many paintings of the North, and while they will capture a certain piece of it, I think that they almost always end up fragmenting it more than it tolerates. So music may be the one art that does capture the North better than any other. Certainly language is the most difficult way to try and pin it down.
Except for your language. You
No.
can pin it down with your language. Your story about flying with the pilot and the cockpit made the lights of Resolute Bay and its name seem very touching. Is the effect of the North to make human beings more or less important? A quick reply to this before we go into the scientific world.
I think that the North almost inevitably makes humans feel insignificant. And I think that's probably a good effect. We need to be reminded that we are mere biological organisms, even though we think we're so smart, even though we think we can survive anything, even though we think we can change the world. In fact, the North reminds us that we are basically going to go the way of, well, maybe we'll be outlasted by the cockroaches and the rats.
Thank you very much, Anita. Abbiamo parlato parlo in italiano per introdurvi brevemente un saluto che viene dal Comune di Siena. Stavo dicendo all'assessore che porterà questo saluto quello che abbiamo fatto. Abbiamo viaggiato nel nord per 2 ore con 2 distinguished writers, a biographer and a creative writer. Once again, we take the opportunity for having helped us to make this event possible, to thank the Comune di Siena, or whatever you want to translate this with, municipality of Siena or something like that. You can speak Italian, English, or whatever.
Thank you very much.
L'assessore Cannamela, assessore all'ambiente.
Allora, io parlerò in italiano.
Ok,
parlerò in italiano,
sì.
Non so se vuoi tradurre.
Mi
capiscono la maggior parte. Perfetto.
La maggior parte è italiana and I'll translate to the English speaker.
Allora, innanzitutto sono io a ringraziare il Centro Siena-Toronto, voi per questo invito, e a porvi saluti da parte dell'amministrazione comunale, da parte del sindaco che non ha potuto essere presente per i noti impegni della manifestazione. Chiaramente è per noi un onore e un piacere ospitare la nostra città, come tutti gli anni mi verrebbe a dire, un convegno di questo livello che ci consente di aprire una finestra verso un mondo non troppo conosciuto come quello canadese, e che ci consente anche in qualche modo di entrare in relazione con un tema, quello della sostenibilità del nostro modello di sviluppo e evidentemente del nostro sistema anche produttivo, che come istituzioni fatichiamo spesso ad affrontare pubblicamente. Perché affrontiamo faticosamente questo tema? Lo affrontiamo faticosamente perché chiaramente in una fase di profonda crisi economica, di profonda recessione, il nostro Paese si interroga e ragiona su come poter uscire da questa dinamica e non tanto sul carattere della qualità della propria produzione. E questo è un errore di dimensioni epocali a mio modo di vedere, perché se possiamo leggere il mondo come un terreno di competizione in questo momento tra un oriente dei cosiddetti paesi BRICS, anche se non sono tutti ad oriente, ed un occidente del nostro vecchio mondo occidentale, europeo e nordamericano, probabilmente saremmo in grado di leggere in questa competizione anche un terreno che si gioca tutto sulla qualità del lavoro e sulla qualità del modello di sviluppo. È evidente, penso, che di fronte al livello dei redditi medi del cosiddetto mondo dei BRICS, l'Occidente si deve porre una domanda che è sempre la stessa, ovvero sostanzialmente se è in grado di inseguire quei livelli salariali oppure se deve investire la propria riflessione produttiva sulla qualità della propria produzione, sulla ricerca, sui livelli che porta avanti. E in questo io credo che il tema ambientale, il tema della sostenibilità e del clima sia un tema centrale, un asset di riflessione. Credo che non si farà mai abbastanza per provare ad investire in questo senso. Come territorio io credo abbiamo fatto qualche cosa. Abbiamo provato, in particolare la sfida di Siena Carbon Free 2015, è una sfida che porta avanti la nostra provincia, la nostra amministrazione provinciale, che tenta di arrivare nel 2015 ad avere un bilancio zero di emissioni di CO2 e di consumo di CO2, di risparmio di CO2. Penso che abbiamo provato a metterci davanti un obiettivo che risponde evidentemente alle esigenze climatiche e ambientali del nostro pianeta. Un obiettivo che ovviamente non è sufficiente, benché ci collocherebbe, anzi bisogna sempre usare in questo caso un tempo verbale diverso, evidentemente, ci collocherebbe ad essere la prima area vasta, la prima regione in Europa ad aver raggiunto questo livello di emissioni confrontate al risparmio energetico, al risparmio di consumo di CO2 ottenuto grazie alle azioni che mettiamo in campo. Ecco, io penso che riflessioni come queste, che comunque interrogano noi stessi su evidentemente la qualità ambientale del nostro agire, siano sostanzialmente riflessioni centrali che non debbano in qualche modo essere marginali o parallele all'azione amministrativa, ma debbano permeare, mi verrebbe da dire, l'azione di tutti gli enti locali. Per questo motivo, insomma, augurandovi buon lavoro sia per il proseguo della mattinata che per il pomeriggio, vi reinoltro i saluti dell'amministrazione comunale e vi ringrazio ancora per l'invito.
Thank you so much. Just a brief the translation of the whole thing will into English will come later, and thanks to Assessore Cannamela. Impossible to translate that.
I want to thank Assessore Cannamela for this speech and for the saluti from the mayor, from the sindaco, and has an important significance for us to have here the Comune di Siena, you said here as a promoter of our center, together with the government of Canada, and together also with the Banca dei Chianti. During your speech, I was with the representative of the Banca dei Chianti, who apologized because the president cannot come for that problem. So voglio ringraziare il presidente della Banca dei Chianti per questo atto di saluto insieme a quello del sindaco. Grazie.
It has been good to have these comments on sustainability at a time of a profound crisis, which have been made by Assessore Cannamela, because this leads us into the topic which will be discussed by Professor Capineri, who will introduce herself, because that's the way we more or less go today.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Siena for our Canadian friends. I know you lack snow in Canada this year. This is the same in Italy. It's a problem probably of climate change and so on. Actually, I feel really embarrassed to talk now because I'm really a lover of mountains. I'm really in love with snow and ice, but after talking after the Canadian, I feel like a Lilliput. I don't know if Lilliput is like but a micro thing. But my point of view is a little bit different, but the previous talks give me an interest in sorry, it's already there. It gives me a link to what I'm going to talk about. Everybody, probably not the very young ones, I don't know if Uncle Scrooge is still fashionable, but I remember I used to read it, and Klondike has been part of popular culture. I think in this picture we have all the elements mentioned in the previous talks. So we have the greedy people, the happy ladies, and we have gold, and we have well, we can see how Uncle Scrooge is dressed in a very harsh and rough way. So I think this is interesting because we are talking about something which has acquired sort of a mythical value. But what are we talking about nowadays? I mean, it's still Canada. I am zooming a little bit. I'm intending Canada not only as a Yukon province or so on, but as north in the world. It's still a rich country. We know that Canada has always been considered rich in terms of mineral resources, natural resources. If you are fond even of natural life, if you like bird watching, and you see the more particular species that you can find in Canada, is still rich. So what I am proposing here today is to read this wealth of Canada from two different points of view, because in environmental analysis we can consider an ecological dimension, but also a socio-political dimension. I have been working with environmental indicators for a while, both at a local scale and at a world and global scale. And so I will be using something very, very simple, because we haven't got time to go into depth of these indicators, which would need a very long discussion. And I'm using two very simple things. First of all, for the ecological dimension, I will be using the ecological footprint and the biocapacity indicators. What are they? Very simple. Biocapacity is what, let's say, nature, what our environment can give us to supply, to maintain our lifestyle. I don't say our life, because our lifestyles are different, very different in the world. The ecological footprint is also very intuitive. If you walk on the sand and if you are a bit heavy, your footprint goes down. If you are lighter, your footprint maybe cannot even be perceived. So the ecological footprint is what we demand from the biosphere to maintain our lifestyle. And let's look at this. Let's look at this map. This is a world map. Green, let's say, is good. Brown is bad. What are the green countries? Green countries are countries where the biocapacity is higher than the footprint. So it means, in a way, that these countries still have a good natural supply to maintain their lifestyle. So do we have a green north? Yes, we have a green north. We have a green north, and I will be comparing Canada with European Green North, which is the Scandinavian countries. I'm not talking about Green South. We have Green South, but I cannot do this because we are referring to countries where lifestyles are different, political situations are different, and also the ecological supply in a way is different. So let's concentrate in the north. If we go back a little bit, we can say, okay, we are safe, we are green, we are rich, we are okay. Because this is a picture, 2010. But if we look at trends, let's say, what's going on? Where are we going? Let's look at Canada's trend of green line is biocapacity, red line is ecological footprint. Canada has got one of the largest biocapacity per capita in the world, 25 global hectares. I imagine, for those who are not experts in these indicators, it's like the land, the area we need for our life. But is this biocapacity still there? No, it's rapidly going down. And what about lifestyle? Lifestyle is also quite high. If you see in the grid, it's 0.5. Next to Canada, we have Sweden, similar trend. Quite a good biocapacity, quite a high footprint because lifestyle is high. Just to give you an idea, what's happening in Italy? In Italy, we are the other way around. We have a very low biocapacity, so our supply is very low, and our ecological footprint is rapidly increasing. So we are one of those countries that are already in a very bad position. So very difficult to change the trend of the situation. The last part in the graph is the United States. United States started well in the 1960s, but then very quickly moved in a similar situation to Italian country. That is, their ecological footprint went up and biocapacity went down. Now, we could go into the analysis of how these indicators are built, and we cannot do this, but if you are interested, and if you go into the website of the Ecological Footprint Network, you can find all details, you can find profiles for each country. But what tell us the message I want to give from this is that there are countries with different behaviors, and so what do we do? Do we have reactions to these situations? Or are we happy there? We say, okay, we are rich, we have enough biocapacity. In the case of Canada, we have a big country, not a very dense population, high biocapacity, so we are okay. In Italy, we have different situation. We are a lot in a much smaller country, so the relationship is, of course, different. But let's look at the other side of the ecological problem. I told you ecological dimension and socio-political dimension. So if we take the results of other indicators, such as environmental performance indicators, which is the first one, EPI, and the other one, ESI, which is environmental sustainability indicators. They are huge indicators, and they have got inside, it's like if you are fond of Spanish food, they're like a paella. They've got everything inside, so we could discuss a lot about these indicators. But let's assume that because they are produced by Yale University, so we imagine that they have some scientific background, and so we can rely on their results. If we look at the position of environmental performance indicator, what is it? What does it say? These indicators tells you if a government is doing something at least to mitigate changes in resource depletion, or if a country is doing something to mitigate, I don't say to solve, because we know solving is different, to mitigate, for example, pollution, degradation of resources. Because we have listened to the previous talks about ice, about fantastic north, but I'm sure that someone that will follow in the afternoon will tell us something about what's happening in the Arctic, what's happening in the ice situation. Is it still there? Is it deteriorating? I was reading some reports on how much pollution is included now in the icy regions, and so this is also very, very dangerous. If we see the positions of, for example, Canada ranks 37 out of 132 countries that have been measured, while Sweden is, for example, 9th. USA is 49, Italy is 8. Gabon, I put Gabon because Gabon is another rich country in terms of biocapacity, but the political dimension is again very low, is 40. So I can say that also if we look at the other indicator, the environmental sustainability index, we say that Canada is a bit better there, it's the 6th position, while USA and Italy are very low. This is two messages to say, and we have to look a little bit more inside these indicators, because as I told you, they are like a paella, they have got a lot of things inside. But for example, if we look at the environmental performance index, which has two big groups of variables. One is environmental health, so water sanitation, drinking water, child mortality, indoor air pollution. Canada ranks first, so it's good. So they are doing something in terms of quality of life. But then, if we look at their performance in terms of ecosystem vitality, as agriculture, biodiversity, climate change, fisheries, forest, they rank 96. So the rank is pretty low. And especially some ingredients of this subgroup of the variable, climate change, air, CO2 per capita, forest loss. If you see, the rank is pretty low. So what can we what can we say? There is a very interesting dimension in these indicators that is called global stewardship. Global stewardship, which represents, is a country doing something? And what does it mean doing something? It means, for example, is it does it accept the international agreements in terms of environment? Is it introducing regulations? Is it introducing policies to mitigate effects? Impossible to translate global stewardship in Italian. I've tried. Gestione ambientale globale, maybe. Yeah.
Poi gestione, sì, gestione.
Right. The idea of stewardship is something that you have to manage. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yes, but it refers to a much more interactive way. And if we see, for example, Canada has a very low global stewardship due to the results that I showed you before, while, for example, Sweden has got a much more balanced attitude. What can we say? Because I promised to be quite short. What can we say out of all these very short, very quick explanation of the environmental situation. If we still think of Canada, but this thought can be applied to any country, especially of the industrialized and developed countries. What do we want to be? Do we want to be an ecological niche? Because what you were saying before, something which is really specific, something that is really important. It's like a niche. It's something that we want to maintain. It seems that the northern European countries, like Sweden, Norway, Finland, they try to do a lot. For example, in Sweden, you buy organic bread everywhere. So it means they are, for example, applied organic agriculture as something that everybody has to do. So this is just to give a very simple example. So do we want to be an ecological niche, or are we at risk? So we have 3 possible scenarios saying that what do we do? Do we adopt the same model, business as usual, and so we go on, and so probably the biocapacity will go down, because I haven't discussed, but Canada, for example, why is it at risk? It's a country that is exporting a lot, also in terms of agricultural products, minerals, and so on. So what does it mean? It means that part of its biocapacity is going abroad, is going somewhere else. This is just to give an example. There is also this aspect of trading of resources, because we are not having our resources, we are not closed. The limit that the gold diggers were moving upwards is now maybe it's not moving upwards towards north, but it's globally enlarging. Or do we adopt a slowing down model? When we talk about sustainability, we know here it's another big issue. Because when we talk about sustainability, I talk about sustainability with a lot of American colleagues, and we have a completely different approach between European and American. Completely different. They believe in technology. They think that technology will solve the problem. We say, okay, we haven't got any more petrol, we don't care, we put hydrogen cars. Okay, no, so why do we have to worry? No problem. In Europe, maybe we also have, let's say, more, I don't want to use the word ethical because maybe it's too big, but let's say a cultural approach. That is, how do we want to maintain this? So we have to slow down and change a little bit, not only the economic side, but also the attitude we have towards resources. And if you allow me just 1 minute to finish, while you were talking, because I felt so embarrassed about all these natural beauties you were talking about, I have looked sorry, this is not a very good slide, but I have just made it while we were talking. Maybe all of you know these websites of photo sharing sites where you can publish your own photos. So I have looked at the photos published on the different provinces in Canada, and I have just counted how many photos you had for all the provinces. No wonder that Ontario is rich, because Niagara Falls has got thousands of photos. Yukon ranks third. And what were I have gone through very quickly through the pictures. And what are these pictures? Pictures are the perception of nowadays. I mean, these Flickr people are people like us. We travel, we like the place, we want to share a photo with our friends, or maybe we think we are fantastic photographers and we want to show our pictures. I could find at least 4 categories, animals, special animals, birds, cats, bears, memories from your gold diggers. You cannot read it, but that's Dawson City Jail. That's a picture of Dawson City Jail, so a rusty cage where probably naughty gold diggers were locked in for a long time. The northest picture I could find is a very high cliff north of Yukon and the Klondike Valley. So this is just to say that what we were talking before about resources, we are not only talking about the material resources, but we are talking about some resources that have a cultural aspect, and they are part of our identity, as the talk by Anita was showing. So when we talk about sustainability, we don't have to think only about an economical sustainability or an ecological sustainability, but there is a social and a cultural sustainability that we have to carry on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your most interesting contribution and for your participation, very active participation in this morning's talks, as to follow them. Yes, I think that we should move from the economic, and I don't want to add anything at this time, in various fields into something more cultural and ethical. There are questions, perhaps if we have the time, the assessore might ask if we replicated what Cristina has most precisely and most effectively invited us to consider and to reflect on. Are we at risk? Siamo a rischio? Do we want to be an ecological niche? Dobbiamo essere una nicchia ecologica e dimenticarci di dove buttiamo I sacchettini? I mean, all this kind of, do we go ethical, or do we go, ethical is too big, or do we go cultural, or do we go economically, strictly economic? But I don't want to interrogate anybody now, so if you have a question, so you ask your question. These were my questions. Okay, are there any questions here? Lunch. There is a question for lunch. But before we have lunch, we want something said in Italian. And we move. This has been a wonderful introduction to the scientific session, more scientific session of this meeting. And we would like now to hear also, so we'll continue the discussion later in terms of sustainability and so on. And we want to have the perspective of our friend Fabrizio, Professor Fabrizio Ghilardi, who has written a lot about Canada and who will see the North from his perspective as a professor of international relations, and who, among the other things, recently has written a book on multiculturalismo e multilateralismo e multiculturalismo, esperienza canadese, che mi prendo la libertà di dare al rappresentante del Comune di Siena, se vuoi più tardi lo dirmi, dal momento che stiamo diventando una città molto multiculturale. Grazie.
Oh,
Buongiorno, io parlerò italiano. Prima di parlare vorrei ringraziare ancora una volta, come faccio sempre quando vengo qui invitato a Siena, e vengo sempre con molto piacere, gli amici Laura e Sandro Forconi per tutto quello che fanno per il Canada, che si riflette però evidentemente anche per la città. Sono veramente bravi e fanno delle cose splendide. Lo dico anche perché io stesso ho lavorato poi in un centro, quello che è stato a Pisa, ma qui fanno meglio, devo dirlo. Dunque io parlerò del problema dell'identità. Ne abbiamo sentito più o meno accennare gli echi di questo problema nelle presentazioni che mi hanno preceduto. Com'è che un paese, che un popolo matura il proprio sentimento di identità nazionale? È un processo storico che richiede i suoi tempi. Una cosa importante però, uno degli elementi sui quali si fonda la ricerca il maturare di un'identità nazionale è l'individuazione la parola è grossa, ma diciamola, del nemico, forse dovrei dire l'avversario, o forse dovrei dire ancora meglio il diverso. Ecco, il diverso. Il Canada il diverso l'ha trovato fin dal 1776, cioè da quando sono sorti gli Stati Uniti. Ecco, gli Stati Uniti come il diverso, per quei coloni inglesi, anglofoni e francofoni, perché anche francofoni condividevano la stessa idea, che non volevano essere statunitensi, e dico statunitensi non americane, volendo riconoscere anche al Canada lo status di popolo americano. Quindi i diversi, ecco, e loro combatterono contro gli Stati Uniti, no? Ci fu la guerra nel 1812, insomma c'è sempre stata una continua contrapposizione rispetto agli Stati Uniti, il pericolo di essere assorbiti. La guerra del 1812 fu fatta per non essere assorbiti dagli Stati Uniti. Oggi è un problema forse meno sentito. Granstein, un grande storico canadese che forse qualcuno di voi ha conosciuto, dice che con i fenomeni della globalizzazione, con l'aumentare degli interessi economici, evidentemente si è superata questa idea della separazione rispetto agli Stati Uniti, cioè a dire si va verso, questa almeno è la tesi di Granstein e di molti altri, si va verso una continentalizzazione, cioè un'integrazione. Altri invece sono naturalmente di parere opposto, cioè riconoscono che sì, ci possono essere istanze verso l'integrazione, ma comunque i canadesi sono ancora molto sicuri, o forse anche insicuri, ma la cosa diciamo è incerta, riguardo la loro diversità rispetto agli Stati Uniti. Vorrei citare Ignatieff, che è un diplomatico che ho avuto anche il piacere di conoscere. Ecco, secondo Ignatieff, se dal punto di vista americano le diversità tra i due popoli sono pressoché oggi diventate inesistenti, secondo Ignatieff dal punto di vista canadese invece queste diversità ci sono. Ecco, come il Nord entra allora in tutto questo, dal momento che noi stiamo parlando del Nord? Ecco, il Nord rappresenta ciò che li distingue dagli Stati Uniti, che sono automaticamente il Sud. Ecco, la scoperta di una nordicità rispetto alla scoperta dell'essere a sud invece degli Stati Uniti. Ecco, e il Nord come appunto elemento di distinzione entra nella letteratura, nelle arti, no, del popolo canadese. Cioè, anche qui abbiamo tanti esempi, si possono citare, qualche cosa è stato detto stamani, anzi ci hanno parlato molto di letteratura. Pensate anche alle arti, alla pittura, il gruppo dei sette, il G7, che non è il G7, quello politico, no? Che si riunisce, del quale anche noi facciamo parte, non so fino a quanto possiamo restarne parte, ma insomma il G7 per i canadesi è il gruppo dei pittori nazionali, perché vorrei ricordare Thompson per esempio, perché hanno come soggetto dei loro quadri, della loro pittura, elementi nordici. Ecco, il Nord come mito, il mito della nordicità. Il mito della nordicità è servito per consolidare il senso di appartenenza canadese, come dicevo prima, no? L'identità del popolo canadese. Però ecco, anche nel fabbricare questo mito, nella scelta dei simboli attraverso i quali questo mito possa esprimersi, a volte si sono fatti anche degli errori, e molti in Canada l'hanno notato. Per esempio sono state scelte delle medaglie, no? per consolidare questo sentimento di identità con simboli nordici che oggi forse sono inattuali. Perché dico questo? C'è stato un recente sondaggio della National Geography che ha dimostrato come la percentuale demografica dei canadesi oggi sia cambiata rispetto al passato, quando nacque il mito della nordicità come elemento fondante della nazione canadese. È cambiato demograficamente la composizione del popolo demografico, no? Specialmente nel secondo dopoguerra, a partire dagli anni 70-80 del secolo passato, ormai bisogna dire, ecco, sono arrivate ondate di emigrati che non venivano più dall'Europa o dai paesi mother country, no? Cioè Francia o Gran Bretagna o comunque Europa, ma venivano dai Caraibi, da paesi subequatoriali. Popoli, cioè, che hanno sentito il bisogno di integrarsi, che sono stati integrati, ma che trovano difficoltà di fronte ai simboli dell'integrazione, quando questi simboli dell'integrazione si presentano con caratteri nordici. Per loro il nord non rappresenta quello che invece ha rappresentato in passato e continua ancora oggi a rappresentare per la maggior parte dei canadesi, no? Certo, il Canada è una nazione nordica, l'abbiamo sentito dire stamani in varie forme, Northern Power, si va a cercare anche negli sport un fondamento nordico di questa nazionalità. Io ho sentito dire spesso che il Canada è una hockey nation, sì, una nazione fondata sull'hockey, no? Lo sport dell'hockey. Insomma, ecco, la ricerca dei simboli è una cosa importantissima per chi voglia creare un sentimento di nazionalità. Il Canada a un certo momento ha sentito il bisogno di cambiare la propria bandiera, e siamo a metà degli anni 60 del secolo passato, inventando quella splendida bandiera che voi vedete qui, forse da qui non nella stanza, ma certamente di là ce ne sono tante, quella splendida bandiera con al centro la foglia d'acero, a metà degli anni 60, dicevo, del secolo passato, come elemento di unione, ma tra i francofoni e gli anglofoni, perché le bandiere precedenti esprimevano tutti simboli legati alla corona britannica, evidentemente per ragioni storiche. Comunque la bandiera che è nata, dicevo, 1965, mi pare che è molto bella, e voi tutti la conoscete, ecco, sì, con la foglia d'acero in mezzo, anche questo elemento nordico, riesce evidentemente a coagulare accanto ai francofoni e agli anglofoni anche gli altri che provengono da altre parti del mondo. Ma io vorrei ora lasciare questo aspetto del momento dell'identità per affrontare quella che è la politica nordica del Canada. Il Canada da sempre ha avuto una politica nordica, no? Fin da quando evidentemente appunto gli Stati Uniti hanno cercato di liberare le colonie a nord, cioè le colonie canadesi, colonia dico rispetto alla colonia britannica, e ci fu quella guerra che citavo prima del 1812. Ma soprattutto il problema per i canadesi della sicurezza a nord si pone nel 1880, quando i canadesi, già diventati Stato indipendente o semi-indipendente, ma qui ora non voglio entrare in particolari, nel 1867 ebbero dalla corona britannica nel 1880 furono ceduti al Canada i territori del nord. Questo poneva, diciamo, apriva rispetto al Canada un altro fronte nei confronti degli Stati Uniti, non solo a sud, come era sempre stato, ma anche a nord, perché gli Stati Uniti dal 1860, voi lo sapete, possedevano l'Alaska, comprata dalla Russia nel 1867. E gli Stati Uniti in quegli anni vivevano un'esperienza, quella che avete sentito rammentare oggi, no? Cioè la Gold Rush. Questo creava un problema per i canadesi, che sentivano minacciata la sovranità che avevano acquisito nei territori del nord, proprio per queste turbolenze relative alla corsa all'oro, alla Gold Rush. Quindi ecco, si entra tutto in un problema di complesso che prevede il timore di perdere la sovranità e la necessità di garantire la sicurezza dello Stato nuovo che era nato, nuovo, dico nuovo, il Canada è nato più o meno quando è nata l'Italia unita, no? Su questo magari non ci facciamo attenzione, ma è così, più o meno l'Italia è del 61 e il Canada è del 67. Dominion, forse ho detto male prima indipendente, era un dominio. Ma comunque ecco, c'è questo problema che continua nel tempo. Ora io non voglio fare resoconto storico, ma arrivando alla seconda guerra mondiale, ecco, c'è un problema di sicurezza che fa militarizzare il nord. Il nord viene militarizzato per problemi di sicurezza, ma questo, se viene accettato dai canadesi, viene anche temuto, perché questa militarizzazione che viene compiuta insieme agli Stati Uniti, no, coordinando, diciamo, la difesa del nord, viene comunque sentito come una minaccia per il Canada, cioè come un penetrare attraverso l'organizzazione militare ed anche economica, perché si pensa già a un'integrazione economica, come il penetrare degli Stati Uniti nel nord, cioè nel Canada. Gli Stati Uniti, quando con la pace di Ghent nel 1814 avevano rinunciato a liberare le colonie, come dicevo prima, no? Nella guerra del 1812, avevano rinunciato dicendo che però quando il frutto sarebbe stato maturo sarebbe caduto per conto proprio. I canadesi, memori di questo, temono di essere arrivati al momento in cui gli Stati Uniti occuperanno. C'è insomma un processo di estensione, un processo che secondo alcuni uomini politici venne definito come una vera e propria colonizzazione. È ora che nasce, in questo periodo che nasce quel termine, io credo molto appropriato, from colony to satellite, no? Da colonia britannica a satellite degli Stati Uniti. Ecco. Che dire, gli anni della seconda guerra mondiale e poi il dopoguerra, ecco, negli anni della guerra fredda questo problema è molto sentito, ma si teme la Russia e quindi si accetta. Il discorso cambia quando? Ecco, quando è che si accetta, sempre però naturalmente con riserve degli uni e degli altri, cioè è sempre un dibattito aperto quello dei rapporti con gli Stati Uniti. Le cose cambieranno ora in un recente passato, e dico recente perché siamo alla fine del secolo scorso, cioè quando finisce la guerra fredda. Ecco, allora il Canada sente il bisogno di elaborare, di inventare una nuova politica nordica, la Integrated Northern Strategy, mi pare così si chiami, che prevede una ridefinizione della sua posizione nel nord, in merito alla necessità di avviare un rapporto nuovo con gli Inuit, cioè con i locali, con gli aborigeni, con coloro che insomma vivono sul territorio. È un po' lo sperimentare quello che è uno dei caratteri principali del Canada, che voi sapete essere il multiculturalismo. È su basi multiculturali che il Canada dà luogo a questa politica di coinvolgimento dei locali, degli aborigeni. Anche perché i problemi ora che si sentono, dopo che non c'è più la minaccia dei sovietici, dopo più che tante cose sono passate, oggi i problemi sono climatici, c'è il disgelo delle acque, eccetera, c'è l'insorgere di una situazione che può anche causare pericoli ai locali, agli aborigeni, i quali quindi devono essere coinvolti in questa elaborazione. Quindi ecco la nuova strategia per il nord. Ho detto prima il disgelo delle acque. Ecco, il disgelo delle acque provoca dei grossi problemi. Con il disgelo delle acque aumentano gli interessi di tanti stati rispetto al nord canadese. Perché? Perché il disgelo delle acque crea delle rotte, dei percorsi commerciali. Pensate al passaggio a nord-ovest di cui poi dopo spenderò una parola. Crea dei passaggi attraverso i quali i commerci possono avvantaggiarsene perché abbreviano i percorsi. La Cina, per esempio, guarda con molto interesse oggi alle rotte nordiche del Canada. Perché? Voi sapete che nel mare Indiano, nell'Oceano Indiano, per l'appunto ci sono vari episodi di pirateria, lo sappiamo per tutto quello che succede. La Cina vuole evitare le rotte dell'Oceano Indiano per andare, per esempio, per quelli che sono i suoi... Come?
Of Canada,
yes, ma io continuo in italiano.
You continue in italiano, but I wanted just to stress to for the Canadian guests that you are saying something very interesting, and that maybe we'll, instead of saying it at the end, what you are saying needs translating for further reflections and maybe discussions with them.
Okay, sorry.
Because it is,
I think my mind.
The implications of the thawing of waters. I mean, it's not just climate.
Yes.
That's one point.
Sì, è un problema dei cambiamenti climatici generali, ma quello che volevo dire io è che appunto questo interesse della Cina e di altri crea problemi per quella che è rispetto alla regione nordica, crea problemi per quella che è la sovranità del Canada. Per quanto riguarda, prima dicevo, la rotta del passaggio a nord-ovest, ecco, lì c'è il grosso problema, e voi lo sapete, che è un problema di diritto internazionale, dal momento che i canadesi pensano che quelle siano acque interne, laddove invece dal punto di vista sempre internazionale altri paesi appunto interessati allo sfruttamento di queste rotte pensano che invece debbano essere considerate acque esterne, internazionali. Questo cosa crea? Crea il problema di chi sia responsabile della responsabilità e della sorveglianza del transito attraverso questi luoghi. Un problema che quindi si collega anche in maniera molto precisa con quella che è la situazione del terrorismo, perché attraverso queste nuove rotte nordiche possono entrare più facilmente i terroristi nel Nord America. Gli Stati Uniti, tra parentesi, rivendicano un loro ruolo nel nord proprio in questa situazione, proprio per combattere il terrorismo. Anche se questo è un punto, credo, che possa essere mediato, un punto di contrasto tra canadesi e Stati Uniti riguardo alla situazione del nord, e credo che possa essere mediato perché, per esempio, recentemente l'ambasciatore statunitense ad Ottawa, Cellucci mi pare si chiamasse, ha detto che il controllo e quindi la sorveglianza proprio della rotta del passaggio a nord-ovest può essere lasciata ai canadesi. Ecco, allora, ora se no veramente sono troppo lungo e qui chiudo, vorrei citare una questione che mi pare molto importante ora per quanto riguarda il nord del Canada e questi territori di cui stiamo parlando, e cioè il fatto che entro breve tempo, nel 2021 mi pare, lo scenario nel nord cambierà per la nascita di un nuovo Stato indipendente, e cioè la Groenlandia. La Groenlandia oggi è territorio che appartiene ancora con grande autonomia, ma ancora sotto sovranità danese. È previsto che entro il 2021 acquisti l'indipendenza. Questo vuol dire che acquisteranno l'indipendenza circa 60-70 mila Inuit che abitano nella Groenlandia. Cosa succederà degli Inuit, che invece circa 200.000 credo, che invece sono sotto sovranità canadese? Probabilmente si creerà una spinta verso la nascita di un altro Stato indipendente. Accanto alla Groenlandia indipendente può darsi che questi Inuit vogliano realizzare uno Stato Inuit indipendente. Ora, questo è un grosso problema, perché gli Inuit godono già di ampia autonomia nell'ambito della federazione canadese, del regno del Canada, perché è bene ribadirlo sempre, il Canada è una monarchia. Il capo dello Stato canadese è Elisabetta, regina non dell'Inghilterra ma del Canada, così come Elisabetta è anche regina dell'Australia e della Nuova Zelanda, no? Ecco, allora può darsi che entro breve tempo questi Inuit, che già godono di ampia autonomia nell'ambito del Canada, vogliano creare uno Stato indipendente Inuit, e allora saranno due i nuovi Stati indipendenti. Questo è un problema che acquisterà molta importanza nella prospettiva delle scelte che guideranno verso la formazione della nuova governance, e qui adopero la parolaccia tanto usata ma che è, diciamo, d'attualità. Quale governance si prevede per il Canada? e per tutti il resto, per il nord. Ecco, il Canada ha una grande esperienza di questo attraverso il multiculturalismo e attraverso anche l'altra forma appunto che io ho studiato, che ho ricordato prima, del multilateralismo. Ora scusatemi che forse se no ho parlato troppo.
No,
Grazie.
Credo che il professor Ghilardi, a parte una discussione, apart from a discussion in English with the Canadian speakers, which will not be possible today, but will provide maybe a translation of what he said for them. Ma credo anche che dovrebbe tornare a parlare alle scuole e a dimostrare, forse insomma alla città anche, a dimostrare che il Canada is not that strange thing with which two people, Alessandro Forconi, have got a fixation, but Canada is the arena of many problems and of the solutions of many problems of politics and policy, and also of links with Italy. You didn't mention that, what happens as to treaties with Italy. Could you mention that?
No.
I trattati con l'Italia non ne vuol parlare. A proposito...
Non ce ne sono, dai.
No, ma as to the exploitation of the North. Let's forget about it.
It's not the place now to speak about that.
Ok, allora lo ringraziamo sperando che come tutti voi, as the rest of us, you will come again to talk between and we'll continue in the afternoon. We hope we have as many people, but we know that the strike and then alle 3. Now we disperse, ci separiamo un attimo, facciamo un altro.
Slip a photograph in there, but I don't think I've probably got time. We'll see maybe. I have a photo of a permafrost space with a ladder hanging out of it. And it's where the dog there, so it's a plastic one. But they exposed a ladder that from the ocean. I can show it to you.
Quanti giorni? Sì, ma hai cominciato quando?
Poi agosto, la settimana scorsa, poi a Campano avremo 10
perché hai lavorato tantissimo, ma adesso sono
ci provo. Non ci provo. Ho spero che c'è un
a pungolare troppo, insomma. Lui una presentazione vero anche le fanno quindi mi chiedi di utilizzo
io ne sono
a questo punto insomma si sta generando, chiamiamola sulla scalera a proposito di cose utili, insomma certe considerazioni allargano la visione.
No, perché siamo un'idea sbagliata, ma ci sono canadesi, perché sono una minoranza. Io adesso siamo una minoranza.
Roberto, dove è andato?
Quando io adotto per loro non prendo il ricercatore perché sono tutti qui, veramente mi sembra una trasgressione di termini, mi sembra ha fatto piacere sentirlo e se a te